You're listening to the very first episode of the Brave Marketer podcast. We're so excited to be in your ears today and know you're really going to love the first guests we selected to kick off season 1 of our show. This podcast series features the brave marketing moments our guests have leaned into and the impact they've had. Before getting into our interview with our very first Brave Marketer, we want to highlight our own Brave Pick of the Week. Brave's Pick of the Week is PayPal. PayPal is one of the biggest financial institutions that are supporting cryptocurrency buying and selling. You'll see them with push notifications and sponsored images on the Brave platform. Now, for this week's episode, you'll meet Israel Mirsky, Global EVP, Emerging Media and Technology at OMD. Israel's mission is to drive technology and platform solutions and influence that future-proof business and empower OMD teams around the world to deliver better decisions faster to their clients. He has led the global intel business for OMD, headed performance and social products for Antellect, and developed the emerging media and technology platform practice for global PR firm Porter Novelli. Most recently, Israel created the Brand Decision Framework, which we'll talk about today, an editable score sheet that brands can leverage to ensure decisions they're making reflect the brand values they've committed to. It can help them decide which partners to work with, which platforms to invest in, which social media channels to leverage, based on how these decisions specifically relate to the brand values, which keeps the company accountable to them. During our conversation, we will also discuss the biggest threats and opportunities facing the future of media and advertising. We're really excited to create this very first episode for you. This podcast series is brought to you by Brave, a privacy-respecting browser that actually rewards you for your attention. Now for today's guest, Israel Mirsky. Hey Israel, thank you for joining us on the Brave Marketer podcast. Why don't we kick off by having you tell us about your brave marketing moment and specifically the brand decision framework. What sparked this moment? And if you could share a bit more about the brand decision framework, that'd be great.
Sure. Just by way of introduction, the brand decision framework is essentially a decision-making framework to help brands figure out what they are and aren't comfortable with on the basis of their brand values. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in terms of how we got there, in July, a lot of our clients were asking about the Facebook boycott. They wanted to know what other brands were doing and what we had been doing to keep our teams abreast of the developments and what our early warning systems were that would keep our clients from not only being reactive to these events, but also proactive and ahead of the curve. So you have to know that at OMD, which is the world's largest media agency network, our whole brand promise is based on helping our clients to make better decisions faster. Now we were being asked to help deliver in a context that is explicitly an ethical context. We couldn't decide for our brands, but we needed to help them make those kinds of decisions. And they always knew that it wasn't just about one platform. If we were going to provide an approach to decision-making around these kinds of issues, it needed to come from a place that would really help them to make decisions in this way on an ongoing basis, not just as a one-off. And it's a really hard set of decisions to make. Increasingly, we have individual clients who want to make more ethical choices. And there's a lot of really concerning things happening in the world. And media is an inextricable part of that. It's actually why I'm in media, where advertising dollars flow, how projects are funded, really shapes the nature of the content that is produced, which in turn shapes our society, what it cares about and what it worries about and what it dreams about. These investments in the media ecosystems of various countries are, of course, massive. They're over $240 billion in the US, for example. And they are overall, with the exception of direct subscriptions and cable licensing fees, the lifeblood on which the media ecosystem subsists, our societal circulatory system. And when the ecosystem that those dollars shape is not healthy, when it's misinforming people, when people are getting hooked on QAnon through it, there are, of course, reasons for concern for advertisers. And what I realized is that it's not only a purely ethical concern either. A lot of this stuff is affecting their bottom lines too. How long it takes to reemerge from the pandemic. That's affected by adherence disinformation, by vaccine misinformation. It's a direct correlation. And that's just the least political example. A lot of this stuff disrupts societies, affects economic stability, which affects growth, and it's eating away at our clients' profits. But historically, whenever a conversation like this would begin, it would be a moral discussion. And before you know it, it's a conversation about individual morals. And no individual client wants to defend moving tens of millions of dollars around over an individual moral stance. So we've been faced with this challenge, how to help our clients make these decisions. And as it so happened, at the same time, I was reading some behavioral science research about climate denial. And as what's been a concern for science, a huge concern, how to get people to pay attention to the science around this area. The research is clear, but people just don't change their opinions easily. So how you do that is a really big question. And as it happens, one of the very few things that works is when you ask people to be explicit about what their overall values are before you have a conversation about climate science with them. And when you do that, when you crystallize what people stand for, and then you talk about what's happening, it allows them to engage in a different way with the subject and change their opinions. And I looked at this research and I thought to myself, what if we used brand values to help with this in the context of the ethical issues that we're helping people to confront? So companies are used to making decisions based on their brand values in other contexts. There's just never been a way to relate them to their behaviors in the marketplace in a quantitative way that would help them to compare partners to each other by how aligned those partners are with their brand values. That would allow them to understand the size and the scale of the problem and track whether they were getting closer to alignment or farther away from alignment. So something that the head of media could take to the CMO, or the CMO could take to the CEO or the board and say, look, we are lining up how we behave in the advertising marketplace with who we are as a company. Look at this progress. Look how we're doing. And here are ways that this contributes to the health of our bottom line. So that's the brand decision framework. We give it to our clients, so it becomes that brand's decision framework, not ours, based on their values, and we just help to maintain it.
Got it. Just to help picture it a little bit more for the listeners, can you share what it exactly looked like what kind of questions, what's the user flow of the framework?
The user flow looks like, in one end go the brand values and a list of the issues that have been identified with each of the partners that are related to those brand values. So you do a bunch of desk research around all those issues. And then you essentially count the number of clashes between each of the brand values and the issues in a large spreadsheet. And then you apply some math to essentially balance and normalize the amount of investment so that you can understand how big the problem is for a given partner, and also how the size of the misalignment might compare from marketer to marketer so they can start getting benchmarks. When you roll all of that data up, it gives you a sense of how the overall scores are trending for that individual brand. So are they getting more aligned to their values based on their investments, or are their investments and their values becoming less aligned? And that gives you a direction to point in. I'm a big believer in the idea that if you can't measure something, that it won't improve. The goal here was really to create a way to measure that alignment so that brands could improve that alignment. And since overall brands' values tend to align with our society's values, this would over time increase the amount of alignment between the way that media is deployed and the kind of job that it does for our society.
Got it. And so you come up with this idea. Tell me about the support team that you had. And more specifically, was there pushback? I mean, did this require a lot of courage? Were you quote unquote brave to do this, or was this just an idea and everyone just immediately jumped on it?
I think this was very different from any approach that anybody had taken before. I think historically, any time that we got into a conversation about these issues, the clients really felt like they needed to be neutral to a fault, where they couldn't really make these kinds of decisions because they didn't have a basis on which to make them. So the idea of bringing to them a way of doing that was extremely different. And initially, we weren't sure if it was going to work. We weren't sure if anybody was going to pick it up. They were just going to look at us like we had two heads. The reception was extremely positive from some of our largest clients, really led to some of the best scores that we've had with some of those clients. We really felt like that risk paid off for us. Proud is the wrong word for what we are of it. We feel very deeply that this approach should become part of how our industry operates, how these critically important decisions are made to really help maintain the long-term health of these individual businesses. And it's been really impactful and just keeps getting bigger in that way.
Well, just to bring it all together, Israel, I know you can't share specifics or specific client names, but can you share anything about the impact this has had, or maybe just the ease of decision-making process because of the brand decision framework?
Absolutely. First and foremost, it's not for everyone. Not every brand is interested in making decisions with their brand values in view. But a number of our largest brands, especially those who already have been looking for ways to incorporate more of a brand responsibility component, D&I, because you can do versions of this that specifically call out diversity as part of your overall brand responsibility goals. For those brands, it's been really impactful, and they are tracking this on a quarterly basis to understand and improve this alignment and to become more true as brands to their values. And the focus is really, of course, we begin with our direct stakeholders, but it's going from the head of media to the CMO, and the CMO to the CEO, and the CEO to the board, really facilitating some very deep conversations about the role of media in the long-term maintenance of a brand's equity.
So shifting gears, what do you think is the biggest threat or most pressing challenge facing the marketing or advertising industry today?
Unsurprisingly, from the earlier part of this conversation, I personally think that the most pressing challenge is misinformation and the loss of reputation as a major signal in the way that we buy media. It takes a lot of energy to discern what's true for most people. I've been taken in by misinformation. I'm sure we all have, by one or another piece of health, often health-focused misinformation. And the problem is that we've allowed attention to become a proxy for authority and for expertise. So if something gets a lot of views, it must have some truth to it. So I'll give you an example. So we've known for a long time that content moderators get PTSD at accelerated rates. A couple of years ago, we found out that they also become conspiracy theorists at accelerated rates, despite being hired and trained and bonused and supervised to be able to tell truth from falsehood. And the reason is because of being exposed to this stuff just over and over again. We're not a solitary species. This is genetic. Being out of the group even a couple of thousand years ago meant you were going to die. So we've been programmed to have a bias to agree when large numbers of other people have a given opinion. And that's what view count or like count really is. It's a massive social signal that says, on a very deep level to our brains, agree with me, that we're just not prepared to ignore it. Another analogy might be like if you've ever gone fishing with a fishing lure that really doesn't look like anything that lives in the water, like bright pink or something. It's not like anything in the natural world, but it works because it activates the fish's brain like crazy. And the like count, huge numbers of views on a video operate similarly. It overwhelms to some degree our ability to agree or disagree with a given opinion that's being expressed. You extrapolate this out, you're asking me about threats and challenges facing the industry. The next horizon is media platforms that are decentralized, where any kind of management of the content is really impossible. And this is really on the horizon. We see platforms like Library, DTube, and Steemit, and Minds, and Aether, which copies Reddit, and Mastodon, which copies Twitter in a decentralized way, Karma for Instagram, that are testing the waters now as decentralized versions of these social platforms with the same architecture and the same approach. So as an advocate for free speech, there are positives to this, but there are also, of course, some really terrifying negatives. Think of the kinds of content that could flourish on such platforms using the same mechanisms, like child pornography, for example, or terrorism videos. Like, with no true moderation functionality, the combination of the social signal and the content could wreak real havoc at a massive scale. And never mind that these platforms don't need advertising to survive, and that's a real concern for advertisers too, losing significant share of attention to places that we can't advertise in. I think that'll shift more attention to influencer work. But the societal effects of having readily available content of real concern without any real truth or reputation signal boosted to tens of millions of people, I really think that could do incredible damage. And if the surrounding environment was healthier, maybe I'd be less concerned. This might take less hold in Finland or Norway, for example, where information health is part of the curriculum. Kids are being taught from a very young age how to manage their information diet, and they've had a lot of success. But here in the US and in the rest of the world, I'm really concerned, and I think we all should be.
Will there ever be an advertising opportunity on all those platforms that you mentioned, the decentralized ones?
I think it's possible.
And the follow-up to that is brand safety concerns. What advertiser in their right mind would even jump into that, because it's so decentralized and on like the Wild West?
To your point, like, the funny thing about these platforms is they may not need advertising to survive. because of the way that they spread the costs around. Of course, any platform that attempts to incorporate the advertiser dollars will have to, past a point, will have to start to implement some kind of brand safety standards and content standards. But I think that's going to be an odd middle ground to live in, where they're going to be trying to grow against a Facebook or an Instagram or an existing large platform that already has network effects, but without any of the ad-free benefits of the decentralized platform. So I'm not sure how good I think the prospects of those sort of intermediate entities might be, at least in the short to medium term. The other funny thing is, when we talk about brand safety standards, who cares about brand safety standards, right? Right now, large brands care a lot about brand safety standards, but small advertisers, especially D2C, like a lot of them don't care. And those smaller advertiser dollars are supporting all kinds of content that is of significant concern, partly because they don't have those same standards. They don't have necessarily the tools with which to understand what their content is supporting. And because they're just trying to survive, they don't necessarily have the luxury to steward their brand in the same way. The implications of that are significant. There are no easy answers to how to help smaller advertisers not create those kinds of problems for the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, so that's more, all in the thread area, just to be opportunistic. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for brands or agencies right now? And how is OMD leveraging that, and maybe something above and beyond the brand?
Well, with regard to what we're doing in the existing world, we're very active in GARM, the Global Association for Responsible Media, where we're working on standards that various platforms need to align to in order to engage with advertisers. It's no secret that misinformation is on the agenda there. Also, as part of the forays, I co-developed a white paper about misinformation specifically that anybody who's interested in this topic can definitely go take a look at if you just Google Adweek and the APB and misinformation. I think the opportunity is to help clients to navigate the renewed importance of context. And in a world where the cookie is going away and retargeting is going to be a much more challenging thing to do, in a world where research that we're getting is increasingly clear about the importance of context and the impact of context, I think navigating how to re-engage with context in a digital first way is a big opportunity. Building tools to better understand it, building frameworks to leverage and make decisions on the basis of it, building ways to report around context are all significant white space that can have really massive effects on how well a brand's media performs and kind of equity that's able to build.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. I have two more questions, more of a lightning round type of style. So if you wouldn't mind finishing this sentence, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't X.
If I hadn't stopped thinking about how hard something was going to be. Many years ago, when I was right out of high school, I got a job working at the Fulton Fish Market over the summer to help pay my college tuition. Back when it was the South Street Seaport. You might remember the South Street Seaport. It was a terrible job. So the job was, you got up at 12:30 or 1 a.m. and you put on your rubber overalls and you grabbed this big metal hook with a crossbar on it for picking up the boxes of frozen fish, like the one in I Know What You Did Last Summer. And you walked down to the market that was just opening up at that time under the FDR Drive. You got the overpass above you and you move these massive, loads of fish by hand, 400 or 500 pounds with ancient hand trucks to scary people in dark parking lots. And I was feeling really sorry for myself after I took that job, especially that first week. With every step, I was achy, I shivered, and I whined to myself about how hard it was. And I didn't have anybody to share my whining with. It was an environment full of tough guys. But one guy at the stand that I was working at, Mike, was nice to me. He was a huge guy. He was an ex-con, and he'd been working at the market for something like 30 years, every night. And he worked inside the huge walk-in freezer, so it was always cold and clammy in there. I whined to Mike, and I said, this job is terrible. I need this job, but I really want to quit. You've been working here in a freezer for 30 years. How do you get through it? And he looked at me and he said, there's nothing to it but to do it. All that thinking about how hard it is, how hard the problem is, takes up the space you need to get it done in. I really took that to heart. It was kind of a Zen moment for me about suffering and action from somebody who really knew what it was to suffer every day. And I took that into my time at the market and into my working life. And it always really helped me to take on challenges that were, in retrospect, kind of frightening. So I don't know now that it's always been so healthy. And as I get older, I'm spending more time trying to pay attention to what's going on inside myself. But there's something about working hard on a problem and not letting yourself worry too much about how hard that problem is going to be to solve that I think has really helped.
I love that. Will you repeat that? All that effort to how hard it was. Can you repeat it?
All that thinking about how hard it is, the problem, takes up the space that you need to get it done in.
So applicable to so many aspects of life where you're ruminating about an issue. And if you just stop ruminating about it and thinking about it all the time and just start doing, probably save yourself a lot of time and anxiety.
Yep, I think that's true.
Thank you so much for joining the Brave Marketer podcast. Your story about the brand decision framework and how you came up with it was enlightening, awesome, and very courageous, actually, to start something in the way you thought about the problem. Any last words for the audience?
Obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about misinformation today, but I think as marketers and publishers and all part of this ecosystem, we're going to have to find a way to get the whole world to fall in love with the truth again. When a lot of people have a strong interest in the opposite happening and a focus instead on just engaging people. If we don't solve this, we don't solve climate change, and the days when we as an industry could operate without that reality in full view are behind us. It's that simple. I encourage everybody listening to figure out together or to work on the problem of helping us all to focus on the truth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Israel. Thanks so much for tuning in to the first episode of the Brave Marketer podcast. We're excited to be back in your ears next week when you hear from a brand who bought their very first Super Bowl ad during this year's game. Duncan Bird, the VP of Brand Marketing and Digital at Fiverr, will be joining us on Monday.